President Biden was asked by the media to react to the recent Colorado Supreme Court decision, which ruled that Donald Trump violated Section 3 of the 14th Amendment and is therefore disqualified from holding public office. The president responded graciously and tactfully. But when the reporter asked a separate follow-up question, the president responded bluntly and honestly, and it triggered the Fox propaganda network enormously, leading to a fascinating exchange on Harris Faulkner's program. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, we have several clips to play. We're going to start with the president being asked by the media to react to the Colorado Supreme Court decision.
President, your reaction to the Colorado ruling on Trump and the ballot?
I'm not going to comment on a court case. That's up to the court. That's all I have to say.
So I just want to say, you can hear it, you can see it on his face. He wants to give his opinion on it. He clearly has an opinion, but he's like, listen, don't be Scranton Joe. Just be, civil President Joe Biden and say, I'm just going to leave it up to the courts. But wait for the follow-up question.
Is he an insurrectionist? Is Trump an insurrectionist, sir?
Well, I think certainly it's self-evident. You saw it all. Now, whether the 14th Amendment applies, I'll let the court make that decision. But he certainly supported an insurrection. There's no question about it. None. Zero. And he seems to be doubling down on about everything. Anyway.
That was a separate question. He gave a blunt, candid answer, an answer that, by the way, is supported by the facts. I want to remind everybody that the primary question that will be reviewed by the Supreme Court is whether or not the 14th Amendment applies to Donald Trump. The question of whether or not Donald Trump engaged in insurrection, that's much more concrete. As a matter of fact, it's a matter of legal fact by a Colorado District Court and by the Colorado Supreme Court. These are two facts not in question. So after a week-long trial in which Trump's attorneys were present and they were able to, provide testimony, give expert witnesses, they made their case. The district court in Colorado by Judge Sarah Wallace, on paragraph 298, she makes it very clear. Consequently, the court finds that petitioners have established that Trump engaged in an insurrection on January 6, 2021 through incitement, and that the First Amendment doesn't protect Trump's speech. It's pretty clear. That is a matter of legal fact as far as the court is concerned, and it was upheld by the Colorado Supreme Court. They held that the district court did not err in concluding that the events on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021 constituted an insurrection. The district court did not err in concluding that Donald Trump engaged in that insurrection through his personal actions. So as far as the courts are concerned right now, it's a slam dunk case. But Biden says the real question, which is, does the 14th Amendment apply? I'm not going to weigh in. And I want to point out before we play this clip, this interesting exchange on the Fox propaganda network, Biden is under no obligation to keep his opinion about any of it to himself. He doesn't sit on the United States Supreme Court. He doesn't sit on the Colorado Supreme Court. The Justice Department isn't the one making this case. So he's free to give his opinion anytime he damn well pleases. And if the shoe were on the other foot, do you think Donald Trump, if he were still the president, would be so restrained? No, of course not. And do you think the Fox propaganda network would be upset if Trump gave his opinion if the shoe were on the other foot? Of course not. So with that double standard established, let's play this clip from the Fox propaganda network on this very topic.
Good at that job. What would you tell President Biden after he said he first wasn't going to weigh in and then call the president an irrefutable insurrectionist?
Well, look, I think the bigger threat to democracy is what Donald Trump did, which was trying to overturn an election.
So you're not going to answer my question.
I think President Biden is right. I was about to, Harris. I think President Biden is right not to weigh in on the court cases. The Supreme Court will undoubtedly take this up. It's a pretty right-wing activist court. I think they will rule in Donald Trump's favor. But it is curious to me how Republicans pledge such fidelity to the Constitution, except when it's inconvenient for their candidate, who we all saw with our own eyes, encouraged rioters to attack the Capitol. And to be very clear, Republicans had no problem with the courts deciding an election in 2000. And voters of all parties, Democrats, Republicans, should be concerned, regardless of the legal case, Harris.
So, Maria, you are doing what the president
Republican nominee.
You're weighing in on a case. And I know you say, oh, he's not weighing in, but he did, because he said he's an irrefutable insurrectionist. Jason, I know you want to jump in. Go ahead.
But Harris, that's not, that wasn't a legal
I'm going to let
argument.
Jason
That's a
jump in.
political
You guys
one.
can go back and forth.
That's
Go
a
ahead,
political
Jason.
one, right?
Murray, you're accusing him of being an insurrectionist, but he wasn't charged with that, and he wasn't convicted of it. In fact, when it came to the impeachment part, he was found not guilty. So how are you going to exclude somebody
Because
from a ballot
Republicans
who was
gave
never
away-
convicted of a crime?
I'm actually not arguing that he shouldn't be on the ballot. The legal argument to me is a separate one, and I think the Supreme Court will settle that. I'm all for more people being on ballots, not less. That's what I think is better for our democracy. I'm making a political case here that the Republican presumptive nominee tried to overturn an election,
we get
has
that.
been charged
we
with
get that,
dozens
Marie,
of felony
but the point
counts
that we are
and shouldn't be
arguing
president
today
for those reasons.
has to do with
Yeah.
what Colorado has done. And I want to make sure I understand you. So what you're saying is it was wrong to take Trump off the ballot. And what you're also saying is politically,
That's not what I said.
Okay, so you think he should be taken off the ballot?
I am not a legal expert. I think the 14th Amendment is a gray area where legal experts across the partisan divide have different opinions on what actually it says. And again, Republicans pledge fidelity to the Constitution most times, except for right now, which is curious to me. The court will weigh in on this.
Marie?
Donald Trump should be held accountable. He should be, and I don't know what that looks like, but he should be.
We'll move forward.
We do pledge fidelity to the Constitution, and if you're convicted of being an insurrectionist, yeah, you're excluded. But he was never even charged with it, and he was not convicted of it.
So a couple of things. Number one, the person, the blonde talking, is Marie Harn. She's been in a couple of other clips that I've talked about in the past. She's very good. She's apparently a former State Department spokesperson. So a couple of things. She made an excellent point, pointing out the Republican Party's hypocrisy with respect to the support of law, to the support of courts, and to the support of the Constitution. They claim to be the pro-Constitution party. They claim to be the party of law and order. They claim to be the party of justice. And yet, any time the court rules against their preferences, then they back away. Then they're not interested in what the court or the Constitution has to say. Number one, she was also correct to point out that, because Harris Faulkner complained about this in a previous clip that I discussed in a previous video, she complained that the composition of the Colorado Supreme Court, the fact that the justices were appointed by Democratic governors and the fact that it was a partisan vote, almost like delegitimized the ruling. And yet, as Marie Harn points out, in 2000, when the Supreme Court of the United States made a partisan vote in Bush v. Gore, which effectively made George W. Bush the president of the United States, those justices who voted for Bush were conservative, appointed by Republican presidents. And I imagine Harris Faulkner and Jason, the other person on the panel, and everybody else, none of them had a problem with it. It's only when the court, any court, rules against Republicans or conservatives on a partisan line, then it's unacceptable. Of course, that's a double standard, and we should reject it and make fun of Republicans and conservatives who attempt to hold us to a double standard. But then number three, this idea that, well, listen, no, we support the Constitution, but Donald Trump hasn't been charged or convicted of insurrection, so how can you call him an insurrectionist? Well, you don't have to be charged with insurrection or convicted of insurrection for the 14th Amendment to apply. We've discussed this again in previous videos. If you look at the language of the 14th Amendment, it says nothing about charge or conviction of the criminal statute of insurrection. Okay, you don't have to. As a matter of fact, it was applied to Confederates in 1868. I think even before the insurrection statute existed. It predates the insurrection statute and applied to Confederates who were never charged or convicted of insurrection. So from the very beginning, that amendment was used against people who were never charged and convicted of insurrection, right? And it's a political disqualification. So he's moving the goalposts all the time. But I love that exchange because the Fox propaganda network doesn't do well when they give time to people who come prepared with the facts, like Jessica Tarlov, like Marie Harn. And this proves it. She was outnumbered 2-1, and she spanked both of them, and it was embarrassing. So I loved it. I love the outrage on it. How dare Joe Biden, give his opinion about something when he's not in a position to make the decision in the first place. Again, he's not on the Supreme Court. And it's a perfectly reasonable answer to a perfectly reasonable question based on the evidence that we have and based on 2 court rulings. Right now, it is a matter of legal fact that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist. And if the Fox propaganda network can't handle it, maybe they should find a different candidate to worship. Maybe. Let me know what you think in the comments.